Hey, besties. Welcome to my live stream. Hey, Alpha. Welcome in. Frankincense. Hello, hello. Oh, very strong alpha male from Finland. This might not be the stream for you, buddy. I'm going to just let you know. Probably not the stream for you. Anyway. Hey, Netta. Glad that a lot of things seem to be shifting very well, I mean, it seems like a good thing that things are shifting very quickly for you. Hey, Olivia, feeling good? I know. I wasn't sure at first. I was like, we don't use those words, alpha bro, in this chat. Sorry. Hey, Kratos. Welcome in. Y'all, I am incredibly low energy today. This week absolutely kicked my ass. It has been a rough time, not gonna lie. Oh, Desiree, so sorry to hear about bronchitis, but glad that you're here. Thanks for spending some time with me tonight. It's a mixed bag, but we're okay. Yes, yeah. Rough week. Rough week in the States. Rough week for anybody who's not a white man. But we ball. Yeah, I was wrong. My election prediction was incorrect. Now, whatever happens after the election, we'll see. But my election prediction was wrong. And because I care about integrity, I feel like I owe it to you guys to take some ownership of that. Election did not turn out the way that I thought it would. And that sucks. But I'm also not surprised. And honestly, I'll just go ahead and say within the spiritual community, even before today, there have been a lot of other predictions that say, there's more to come. I don't personally feel good or confident or wise about suggesting that to my audience just because we've already been through enough. And me personally, I just think it's important to accept reality as it is in this moment because whether we like it or not, whether it was fair or not, whether it was rigged, whether he cheated, whether whatever happened, we have entered the timeline where it appears as though he has won the election and people are responding as such. And that even if they were to reverse the results, I don't necessarily think that puts us in a good timeline. I've seen what the astrology of 2025 looks like, and I'm not optimistic personally. So it feels important to me, hey Samaje, to just confront reality as it is right now and to be very sober about that because whatever the government does, we still have to deal with each other. And I think I said this on Monday. We still have to deal with each other. We still have to deal with the people around us, and we still have to take it day by day. So that's where I'm at. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday were all very bad days for me. I struggled. My nervous system struggled. My body, I physically felt like I was being poisoned, and I did not expect to have such a visceral reaction. But Monday night, I went to bed and I couldn't sleep. I was like, the anxiety started then, and I've been like physically in pain ever since, and struggling to eat and struggling to orient myself because it was very disorienting. Like, it's one thing when you know something is coming and you know intellectually how you feel about our government, how you feel about these systems, how you feel about elections and whatever. But then when it actually happens and you're living through the reality of it, it's a very different experience. And for me, very visceral experience of just like my body hurts. I felt like very familiar feelings of this deep existential dread and anxiety, but also like paralyzing freeze state. And my brain has been offline. It's still kind of offline, but I was able to talk to my parents today and see them and just sit down and have conversations in that way. So I feel a little bit more alive, but I still have not been eating enough. So trying to recover in that sense. Um, but I have a lot of thoughts. Especially in the last couple of hours. I have a lot of thoughts. I wanted to share them. I also just wanted to check in with you guys and see how you were doing because I know if it was intense for me, it was probably intense for you as well. So thank you for being here. And if you haven't already liked the video, please like the video. Tell YouTube that this is a cool, fun place to be. We're hip, we're in with the baddies. So you've been in bed since Wednesday, Kratos? Yes. Yeah, I wish I could have just been in bed. I did have to go to work on Tuesday, Monday and Tuesday, but Wednesday I just did a couple deliveries and mostly was at home. And today also a couple of deliveries, but mostly at home. Yesterday, had a couple of appointments. So I've been moving around some. I haven't just been rotting, but I would rather be rotting. Yeah, Desiree, I hope that you feel better soon. Sophia, hi. Just made some soup, so that means I'm doing if you think that means you're doing good, I'm glad that you are feeding yourself. Yeah, hoping it would be different, but also not surprised. Reality versus illusion has been kicking our asses for real. Quite a hard lesson for me this year. Yes. Yeah. Um, very important to be rooted in what it is so that we can deal with it for sure, for sure. Indeed, let's hear them. You were spinning on Twitter today. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I will be talking about that. Yes, being hip and in with the baddies. I broke down on a work call and then cussed my coworkers out to their faces. So rage is my word. I'm going to see my godfather tomorrow. Good for you. I guess good for you. I hope it was like they probably needed a little kick in the rear. So I'm supporting your rage in this moment and hope you'll get some rest soon. Yeah, one day. Maybe one day. So here's where I'm at. Um, hey Karen, good to see you. Welcome in. And I did already say hi to Samaje, but just to put you on the screen, hi Samaje. So I've just been processing. I haven't been able to write horoscopes. I honestly like even my sight feels impaired because the context that I was understanding 2025 astrology and just astrology in general was through the lens that okay, so let's say she wins, cuz for me it just didn't seem like the government itself, the way that they've been speaking to us, would allow that man to win again, even though they haven't even imprisoned him. That's the least that they could do. But I don't know. I, among many other people, hoped that his first presidency was so bad that if we were able to elect Joe Biden, then we would be able to elect somebody else besides him. And that hopefully even Republicans wouldn't even get him in. But he's here. And knowing his chart, knowing he has a Scorpio moon, and based on some other conversations we were having today, I've been thinking, the Democrats, Kamala ran such a bad race. Like, objectively, she did run a bad race. I know a lot of people were hopped up on hopium throughout her race, but one, she didn't listen to anybody on Palestine, and that would have easily secured her plenty of votes that she did not get. But also, she really didn't get very many actual liberals very libbed up because she was running a center campaign. And I know we didn't talk about this very much, but I was listening to a lot of commentary on this. And the fact that she ran a campaign that appealed to the center or at least towards center right, like a moderate campaign or centrist campaign or whatever, she abandoned basically a lot of liberals and Democrats. So um, she abandoned a lot of liberals and Democrats. And so I feel like just from that perspective alone, it feels like they threw the election. And the other thing about it is that Donald Trump is a perfect scapegoat for everybody. He's a perfect scapegoat for Republicans. He's a perfect scapegoat for Democrats. He's a perfect scapegoat for all of us with his Scorpio moon because he's already assumed the projection of being the worst that it could possibly get, having Mars and Leo rising, right? He's already assumed the projection. He's put that shoe on, laced that bitch up, and said, yes, as a matter of fact, I do whatever I want. I get whatever I want, and people will come and listen to me say whatever I want and still vote for me. He said that from the beginning. And for that reason, I think my personal conspiracy, if you want to call it that, or theory, is that as long as he exists in the political world, the government can get away with a lot of shit. Republicans can get away with a lot of shit. Democrats can get away with a lot of shit because they can put it all on him and nobody else has to really take any accountability. Now, I say that with the caveat that I do think the far right, especially, and a lot of just right wing people, Fox News, all of those people, um, do kind of disagree with him to some extent, but for them, they don't need to agree and all think the same in order for them to do their shit. They're going to do whatever they want to do, regardless of who's heading it. It's the same reason why Ted Cruz is still the senator of Texas, even though a lot of Republicans don't even like him. Like, they don't even like him. So, as long as yes, exactly, he's the perfect villain. As long as the perfect villain exists in any of these spaces, it paves the way for them to do way more nefarious shit. And what I was thinking about with this is that, for Kamala, one of my other mutuals on Twitter, um, Fatty the Great was saying that, to them, a lot of this has to do with Israel and AIPAC basically using Kamala as a way to manufacture even more consent for the genocide, because if she can run her campaign and not waver on her position that Israel has the right to defend itself, then they've manufactured consent now, not just from Zionists, but now even from just the general public, from Black people, from other minority groups who maybe otherwise were leaning leftist and at the very least anti-genocide. So it kind of seems like that happened, especially because of, as many of us on the Twitter timeline saw, plenty of liberals were very like, fuck what's going on over there. We got to worry about what's going on over here first. That manufactured consent for more genocide. And the more that we didn't push, especially because finding out that the uncommitted movement was basically controlled opposition, it was revealed that a lot of them received money from Democrats basically to not endorse anybody except for Kamala. And therefore, that's the reason why Kamala was the only presidential candidate that they were really rallying against to kind of push for that vote, right? So controlled opposition already with the uncommitted movement and a lot of other people on the inside, where if she could run this campaign however she ran it, my theory is that she ran a center campaign to just to see just how much she could probably, not her specifically, whoever it is pulling the strings, right? Have her run this campaign and just see how much more they could get people to shift right in their politics, purely because Donald Trump is the alternative. And that didn't work on a lot of people, in the sense that, she ran center right on her policies, and so a lot of people just voted for right wing, because again, they weren't really presenting alternative options. They were just saying, I can do what he's doing but in blue. But without Project 2025 on the face of whatever decisions that we make. So it like kind of just made a lot of people feel like, well, if she's just going to run a right wing campaign, then I might as well vote for the guy on the right. Like, why would I do that? The other thing that they did that I didn't even realize until election day was that they put abortion on some different state specific ballots. So a lot of these swing states, I believe, had a separate vote for abortion outside of the general election, so that people could separate voting for Trump and voting for abortion. They could have their cake and eat it too, essentially, which I didn't even realize was a thing until I saw it that night. And I was like, oh, well, again, why would anybody vote blue if abortion has its own vote? So that was already a setup too. And then the other thing, what was the other thing? The other thing is the economy. Like, for whatever reason, people believe that Trump will handle the economy better because of the illusion of politics, where each president is dealing with the previous president's economy. So Trump inherited Obama's economy, and basically was able to ride that wave out until the pandemic. The pandemic crashed. There was the whole stimulus checks and emergency response funds and all the furloughed and all of the unemployment and all of those other things that happened during 2020 of the pandemic while Trump was still in office. And then everything else they could pin on Joe Biden, which was really a result of Trump's presidency. So there's a lot of illusions going on basically that would lead people to think that, yes, under Donald Trump, things were better, even though that's not actually the reality of how all of this shit works. So I understand. I hate it. I don't agree with it, but I understand how people who are just trying to live their life, go to work, come home, spend some money, and enjoy consumerism would think, yeah, things were better under Trump, so I'm going to vote for him. Now, he didn't receive as many votes as he did in 2020, even though he still won the popular vote. But Democrats did receive significantly less, somewhere to the tune of 15 to 20 million less votes than they got in 2020. There's also stuff floating around about how the 2020 election popular vote numbers were, you know, whatever they were for whatever reason. The most votes that Democrats have probably gotten in quite some time. But it was both Democrats and Republicans who got significantly more votes in 2020 than most elections. So I don't know. What I think is that a lot of people died. A lot of people died since 2020. So that's a significant amount of voters that we lost. I do think a lot of people sat out. I do think a lot of people sat out and a lot of people voted third party. Third party vote was not enough to make a difference. Kamala could have gotten all third party votes and still would have lost. So yeah, I just think a lot of people sat out. But I do think that people, yes, and were disabled as well. A lot of people were disabled, probably couldn't make it to the polls. A lot of people are in economic crisis to where they probably couldn't take off work and go vote. There are plenty of reasons why, plenty of very valid reasons, I think, why people didn't vote. And this is kind of why I'm just like accepting that she probably really just did lose, even if that man cheated. Like, there are a lot of very valid reasons, very good reasons why she shouldn't have won, to be honest. But astrologically, I picked her chart to win. And many of you saw why. I didn't read her chart on here, but I have my threads. Anyway, all of that to say, this conversation around manufactured consent feels really important to me. And I didn't really connect these dots until today when I was thinking about 2020, because ultimately, that's how we got here. And that feels very important to reflect on what actually happened in 2020, because the way life is set up right now, we're all experiencing some level of like collective amnesia from just the literal trauma that was the pandemic, or that is the pandemic, but that was 2020 specifically. And it was also just actually 4 years ago, so it's hard to just remember what actually happened. So I was doing some reflecting, and I remembered something that I kind of just forgot about, and that was the Great Barrington Declaration. Do y'all know what that is? Because it's something that I don't know. I don't know if a lot of people actually heard about what the Great Barrington Declaration was, but I randomly thought about it a couple of hours ago and decided to look back into it, check back into it again, because enough time has passed that we actually should revisit that. So the Great Barrington Declaration, it was drafted, I believe, in October 2020, like early October 2020, by a whole bunch of libertarians, basically funded by libertarians, and that includes people like the Koch brothers and like people like that. It was written by a bunch of different, like, I think they were Harvard scientists. One of them is a guy named Jay Bhattacharya. Another one is this other lady, last name is Gupta, and some other doctors. And I think they were doctors, or they might have just been economists. But the Great Barrington Declaration was funded by libertarian economists, basically. And so, in summary, you can Google it. There's plenty of documentation out there. You can go to actual, I think it's a gbd.org or something like that. But you can search Great Barrington Declaration. They have a website. You can look at the website. And it was a declaration out of Massachusetts that basically, in hindsight, absolutely is the policy. Yeah, yes. Yes, it's the policy that has informed our response to COVID. And in summary, the declaration says something along the lines of, us locking down like this is bad for children. It's bad for public health. It's bad for people because children aren't getting their education, people aren't getting their routine checkups, so on and so forth. And their logic is basically that, because COVID mostly affects the vulnerable, the elderly, young children, immune compromised people, that everybody else who is immune competent, who is young, who is healthy, should get infected. That way we achieve herd immunity a lot faster. And we should also just protect the vulnerable, basically by like isolating them from the rest of society. And the reason for this had nothing to do with COVID itself and everything to do with this is bad for the economy. So as much as they tried to frame it as, you know, bad for people in these other ways, the main thing was that it was bad for the economy. Now we knew this. This has been kind of circulating, but I don't think a lot of people knew there was actually a declaration drafted that at the time I think only had 15,000 signatures. Today it has almost a million signatures. So, uh, but yeah, so the idea was, they were referencing places like Sweden, Amsterdam, like all these other places who never locked down in those early months of the pandemic, like we did, and said that, well, look at them, they're all fine. Now, the reality is they weren't fine and they were doing intermittent lockdowns. So there's that. But the issue with the Great Barrington Declaration was that they made it they had conversations with Trump, they had conversations with other people in office, and basically got a lot of support for this document, and it ended up informing a lot of the COVID response that we ended up with. And trying to make sure I'm not leaving things out because brain fog. But let me just pull it up on my phone. There's a podcast also and a book that you can listen to. I have the audiobook. I haven't read the book. I've only listened to the podcast, but it's called We Want Them Infected, because that's actually like a line from these people, was that the intention was to infect as many people as possible. This is essentially where the let it rip policy COVID response came from, was a Great Barrington Declaration. And through allowing everybody else to achieve natural immunity, we wouldn't have to wait for vaccines to basically go back outside. So let me see if there was anything else that I'm missing. Key points of the Great Barrington Declaration. So yeah, so one of the central tenets, ironically, of yes, exactly, good old American eugenics, exactly. And yes, keep that in mind. So the central tenet of the Declaration, ironically, was focused protection. And it says where older people and other high risk groups are better protected than they have been to ensure that they're not exposed to the virus. But the irony is that nowhere in the Declaration does it actually say how they would protect vulnerable people. They just said protect vulnerable people, expose everybody else. Um, letting children and young adults live their lives. This is on their website. Letting children, where is it? Letting children and young adults live their lives without lockdown restrictions does not mean that we are letting them die from the virus, just like we do not accuse politicians for letting people die in car accidents when a new road is built. On the contrary, the GBD reduces the considerable collateral damage for less vulnerable people who face more danger from lockdown than they do from COVID-19 infection. Mind you, this is October 2020, before we actually knew anything about COVID. um, they have like a big Q&A section basically where they're covering their ass to say like, no, we're not encouraging that people deliberately get affected. No, we're not doing this. No, we're not saying that. Um, we're not saying what we're saying, but they're saying what they're saying. So anyway, you can read up more about that. I introduced that just to say that this did very much inform all of the policy and all of the response that we've had to COVID since then, because through this declaration, they were able to manufacture consent basically for us to take off our masks, for us to just go back outside, and for us to not wait for vaccines to um to be created. And then what was I going to say? So from that point, what I was thinking about was in 2020, one of the astrological things that happened that was a big deal that year, aside from, well, actually, I'll come back to that part, but one of the big astrological transits of 2020, and particularly around masking, was Venus in Taurus. And Venus actually retrograded in Taurus. I want to say it was from like May to, it was about 4 months. So May, June, July, August, September, probably like most of the summer. It was at least 4 months Venus retrograded through Taurus. And I remember during that time talking with Dana about how a lot of Venus and Taurus had to do with masking, because at first it turned out that, like, businesses and corporations, a lot of people diverted resources to actually create masks. It was cloth masks at the time, but we were in a situation where, because of Trump, once again, we didn't have enough PPE to go around to the general public, which, I'm gonna just say it for the record, is where that whole thing came from about masks not being affected. It was not because masks weren't affected. It was because we didn't have enough, because Trump gave them all away to whoever he gave them away to. I don't remember exactly what the situation was. That's on record somewhere. I'm almost certain you could look that up. So because we didn't have enough masks to go around, everybody had to basically create their own masks. So we got all kinds of businesses that created these cute little cloth masks and fashionable masks, and they're handing them out at work, so on and so forth. And so it was trendy and it was cool and it was in to wear a mask and to protect your neighbor, because we were in a crisis and because we were experiencing the apocalypse. Well, as soon as, right wingers decided they didn't want to wear a mask because they were uncomfortable, then it turned into my body, my choice. You can't tell me what to do. Had to end mask mandates in Texas. They banned mask mandates, like, I think by the end of the year, if not by 2021. And I want to say that lockdown, quote, lockdown, shelter in place, whatever you want to call it, it only lasted really until August 2020. But I remember in Texas, we were done by May. So people were going back to work in a mask by May, like slowly but surely reintroducing people back into society. And then lockdowns after that were kind of off and on as far as like schools go and stuff like that. Hybrid classes and everything. So we were done with that shit pretty early. And they made it to where you couldn't have mask mandates and you couldn't ban people from coming into your place of business and all that kind of stuff without a mask anymore. Like, that happened here. I know a lot of places were a lot slower, but all of that to say, the masking trend was around Venus and Taurus. And just to make the astrological correlation between that, Venus and Taurus represents social norms, just in short. And so the retrograde kind of showed that, like, there was some kind of change or shift happening with the status quo and our social norms, the way that we understood them at that time. The other thing that was happening in the sky was Jupiter was retrograding back into Sagittarius after its first move into Capricorn. It was in Sagittarius through most of the summer, and then by sometime towards the end of the year, went back into Capricorn. And then eventually we had the infamous Jupiter Saturn conjunction in Capricorn. I believe that was December 21st, when Black people were supposed to get superpowers. So between the Venus retrograde in Taurus and the Mars Jupiter conjunction in Capricorn, those were the transits that I remember saying back then were shifting basically like our understanding of reality in the US as we knew it, but also shifting the way that we engage with society and like the systems, the larger systemic issues that we deal with and all of that kind of stuff. That was like the main shift. And that was because of COVID, because of this massive traumatic event, because of what am I trying to say? Because of this massive traumatic event and because of our response to it, basically. Shifting the way that we engaged with capitalism, especially because the entire world shut down for a moment. Like, consumerism was disrupted by those transits in a big way. And obviously, to the 1% or even the 20% richest people in the country, that they didn't fuck with that. They needed workers, they needed people they needed people at work, in order for everything to function, despite the fact that pretty much everywhere had record profits in both 2020 and 2021. So, with that context in mind and how all of this basically set a precedent, because that's what conjunctions do. They set a precedent for how we engage with that sign. And to have Jupiter and Saturn setting a precedent together, something they only do once every like 200 years, is a really big deal. Well, that's not true. Not 200 years. Every 200 years, I think, in a particular sign, but maybe every 20 something years in general, or maybe it's less often than that. I don't remember. But yeah, I see y'all's comments, by the way. I'm just trying not to lose my train of thought because ADHD. So that set a precedent basically for, we had an experience, a life-changing experience of the world stopping, people working from home. Like, the way we engaged with capitalism and consumerism in that moment is not something that we can just unsee. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, especially people on the right, as we've noticed, that for them was a huge disruption in the sense that they wanted to be at work. They wanted, a lot of people, um, well, I'll say it like this, because it was partially the economy shutting down in the sense that people got laid off. Like, I got laid off from my job. A lot of people got laid off from their jobs. A lot of people got fired eventually whenever it came to COVID vaccines and mandates, which I'll circle back to. But that changed all of our lives, in short. And it also gave us a taste of what it would be like to be sort of socialist. I think socialist. To be just a little, we got a little taste of socialism. And whether everybody wants to agree or not, we have been craving it ever since. And like I said, that's not something that we can just unsee or forget happened. But at the same time, because there was a larger interest in preserving the economy, not human lives, but preserving the economy, that was the other precedent that was set, that we can never let something like this happen again. Because if we do, all of the things that happened that summer between Black Lives Matter, like, people had time, because people were sheltered in place, because people were not freely just outside running amok doing consumerism. People had time to think and had time to watch things happen and watch George Floyd get killed by police officers. And that rippled throughout the world. And everybody all of a sudden woke up and realized, oh my God, what have we been doing? Racism, that was another thing that was a part of Venus retrograde in Taurus, was Black Lives Matter. That was also Mars in Aquarius that summer too. Y'all are seeing how much astrology I hold in my head all the time. But those protests being as big as they were, and had the entire world having attention on anti-blackness specifically and anti-racism specifically, was another huge no-no for the ruling class. They're like, we can't have people out here thinking they can self-determine. We can't have people out here empowering themselves. Are you kidding me? No way. So that was another thing. It was like, there were so many things that happened that year that we should never forget, because it did set the stage for the backlash we're experiencing now. If Obama's presidency wasn't enough to piss people off, everything that happened in 2020 was. So, okay, so we get to December, the election happened. The election has already happened. Joe Biden won. And now we'll go into 2021. Now, 2021 is where it gets tricky, because now we have a Democrat president. And the Great Barrington Declaration has been drafted in October of 2020 and already kind of like floated in to Congress and everywhere else. And then we also got, at whatever point it was in the pandemic, I don't remember, that Delta Airlines CEO was like, hey, we need people to be back at work. And so then they decided, okay, only 5 days instead of 2 weeks. I don't remember where that happened in the timeline, but I'm sure that coincided with probably Mars retrograde in Taurus, because that's the next transit that I was going to talk about. But getting to 2021 and Joe Biden basically saying, I want to say during Mars and Taurus earlier in the year, that if you're vaccinated, you don't have to mask anymore. That was the other big mistake, because again, none of these things were based on COVID science. These were all economic decisions. And the second decision that people didn't have to mask, it just came from the fact that a whole bunch of people were complaining about masks, whether it was that they were uncomfortable or they were making us breathe in microplastics or they were doing whatever. Like people were just so had their panties in a twist about wearing a mask that eventually Biden was like, yeah, it's chill. Like, don't wear a mask. Who gives a fuck? Get your shots. People get their shots. They're still getting reinfections, breakthrough infections. You remember that? And all of the misinformation around the vaccines and all that other stuff. Like all of these things have happened slowly over time that people have just kind of accepted that it's okay to lose a certain amount of the population so long as we're preserving the economy, because preserving the economy is better for all of us than stopping the economy in, I don't know, trying to protect each other from a virus that by that point a lot of people had caught and for whatever reason decided that it was fine. And to be fair, I don't know. I can understand people who did catch it and it felt like mild, right? Remember COVID is mild in early 2021 with Omicron. Like I can understand people catching it after all of the fear around it in the beginning and the actual mass death, the actual refrigerator trucks full of dead bodies, the actual mass graves, very real things that happened. Seeing this many people die and then getting to Omicron and then not as many people dying because we have both the vaccine and a different variant of COVID that wasn't outright killing people. I can understand why a lot of people in hindsight felt like we overreacted. That was not the truth. As we know now, with all the information that's out about COVID, that multiple infections is not good for your health. Like one infection isn't good for your health for a lot of people. But you can't tell people that because people believe themselves ultimately. So we get to this point today. I'll just like fast forward to my point. We get to this point today where now we have genocide, October 7th, 2023, with the incident. I'm not even going to say Hamas, whatever. The resistance actually like steps up and decides, okay, we're done with this shit. Like, let's fucking go. And for a moment, everybody was like, oh no, we stand with Israel, prayers for Israel. And then everybody learned that, oh, actually, Israel's the bad guy. And here we are more than a year later. And we've basically, again, manufactured consent for genocide. So I say all of this to say a lot of Venus retrograde in Taurus involved manufacturing consent for mass death. A lot of Mars retrograde in Taurus between 2022 and 2023, right? Or 2021 and 2022. 2022 and 2023, Mars retrograde in Taurus for 6 months, also manufacturing mass consent for mass death. Then we get here, Jupiter in Taurus, mass consent for mass death through the form of genocide. So now we've reached a point where we have this election, Trump is in office, all red Congress, at least at this point, House and Senate, and Supreme Court. And this happens immediately after an election or a presidential cycle where we just had basically a massive plague and we have an ongoing plague. Well, now they've manufactured consent for eugenics. They've manufactured consent for fascism. They've manufactured consent for genocide. So, of course, why then would any Democrat want to inherit this economy? Why would any Democrat want to inherit this state, this foreign affairs state where there's multiple wars popping off now in the Middle East that we are leading? And why would any Democrat want to inherit climate change as well? Give it to the Republicans. And then this is mirroring, I'm sure, a lot of stuff. I haven't personally done historical research on this, so I can't say too much about it with like confidence, but fascism and the Red Scare and all that other kind of stuff that happened earlier in the 19th century happened after the Spanish flu of 1918. So all of that considered, it makes sense to me why people would elect Donald Trump, because they've been basically sliding to the right this entire time with their decisions to no longer wear masks, to no longer get vaccinated, to no longer to no longer cover their mouths when they fucking cough, you know. Uh the attitude that you don't have to care about other people has already been what's the word? Has already been indoctrinated into us even worse than it was before the pandemic. And so I'll never stop talking about COVID. Cuz in our lifetime that is what changed everything. And now we're reaching the point where, we've been talking about Jupiter square Saturn. If all of this started with the Jupiter Saturn conjunction and now we're at the square, this kind of being not the natural conclusion, but maybe natural progression from that point, except for the the kind of cloak over all of it is identity. And this is something I didn't really catch before, but like all of the infighting that we've been experiencing over the last year, and even just people's idea that racism is about hate. It's not about hate. None of these things, eugenics, none of these things, fascism, none of that stuff is about hate. It's always been about power. So if you can weaken the population by sickening them, poisoning them, turning them all against each other, there's no, like, if we can hate each other, the government doesn't have to hate us. They can stay in power. They can have all the power that they need to do whatever the stuff is that they want to do. Same thing with trans rights. And this is the other thing I wanted to talk about. But I'll pause because before I change subjects, I want to see what y'all are saying in the chat because I've just been ranting. Okay, so y'all looked into it. Great Barrington Declaration. If you just joined, yes, herd immunity pre-vaccine is what the Great Barrington Declaration was, and it was the intentional decision to let non-vulnerable populations and children get infected so that vulnerable populations wouldn't have to get infected and could just stay isolated away from society until we achieved 70% of the population getting infected. So that then influenced basically all of our COVID policy ever since, and people basically consented to it because they wanted to go back to work because they needed to feed I say they wanted to go back to the work. They needed to go back to work because the way capitalism is set up, if you're not working, you can't afford to feed your family. Good old American eugenics. Exactly. Yes, it's nuts. If y'all haven't looked into it since I just mentioned it earlier, please look into it because there's a lot of stuff that was happening behind the scenes that people were not talking about. Lockdowns are more dangerous than infection. The death rate at any time say otherwise. Yeah, exactly. But that was the other thing that they argued was that the death rate for COVID was only like 1 or 2%. So in their minds, that was less than the flu. So why do we care so much? When it's like, girl, there are worse things than death, as a matter of fact. Matching masks with your outfits, yes. We barely had them in ATL and people came to ATL to party. Yeah. I worked in a hospital during that time, and the message was that high quality masks should be rationed for medical workers and not for the general public. We were wearing the same surgical ones until they broke. Yes, exactly. Exactly. That was the other thing, too, that got lost in the sauce is that high quality masks always worked, but only healthcare was able to have them because we didn't have enough. Didn't even get to stop working because I was an essential worker. Yes, exactly. That's why the lockdowns weren't even real lockdowns because we still had people. I had friends who still worked at the mall, friends who still worked at fast food restaurants and regular restaurants, and people who still had to. I mean, my yoga studio friends were still working. Like, lockdown my ass. I remember that transit peak worst mental health for me and no superpowers for real. Yeah, the ozone was repairing itself. Nature was healing. Like everybody was joking that nature was healing and the air was easier to breathe because people weren't outside stuck in traffic all day long. I was a student worker primarily, unemployed from spring to fall, not qualifying for PUA had me bent. Yeah. And that was the thing too. Like when I say I understand why people think the economy was better, like my bank account was better. I was in a second house perfection. I was getting that Republican money. Like I met my savings goal. I had all kinds of stuff going for me. I wasn't having to pay rent. I was living at my parents' house. Like my personal economy was better under Trump, but it didn't have nothing to do with Trump. It had to do with everybody who was in the House and the Senate who passed a lot of those bills. That wasn't Trump. That wasn't Republicans. You really think Republicans are giving people free money? Free money. But you really think people are giving people financial assistance? No. No. Fake news. I was so sure the George Floyd uprising was going to make America collapse. The momentum was so high. Exactly. Like they could never let that shit happen again. When you consider how powerful that movement was, the way white people for once actually like felt bad for not realizing how much how much racism they were unknowingly perpetuating and actually being willing to learn and read books about it and like mm, just yeah. And now I just saw an ad for a movie that says, "Am I racist?" And it's like a whole bunch of the worst people you've ever fucking seen making a mockery out of the idea that anybody's even racist in the first place. Like we're in the bad place. Worked in a hospital for a minute and hearing a transporter say to a patient they got it in the beginning and they still aren't the same years later with a mild case. Exactly. Yeah, I had friends, very close friends who how they were before they got infected and how they were after they got infected were completely different. And I mean, now that there's more studies out about what COVID actually does to your brain, to your mind, to your frontal lobes, to all of that kind of stuff, like a lot of people had real mental health crises after they got COVID that they have not recovered from. Like people that I knew personally, plenty of people that I knew personally were severely injured. So it's just like, so anyway, so the reason that I was thinking about any of this was because, you know, a lot of people have very kindly been messaging me from you know very various points of my life, people from my hometown, people from the yoga studio that I worked at, from college. Like a lot of people are reaching out to me, family members, and asking me if I'm okay. And you know, on the one hand, I did feel very alone on election day in the sense that, you know, a lot of my leftist friends were kind of like, well, yeah, duh, what'd y'all expect? Like, I'm not surprised. I don't feel no type of way. And I was like, okay, cool for you. I also kind of knew what to expect, but I still feel like shit. I don't want to feel bad for feeling like shit. I don't want to feel stupid for feeling like shit or like I should have known better. No, I just feel like shit. And I wish there was more space held for that. So on the one hand, I felt I didn't feel very good about that. But then on the other hand, it was kind of weird having friends who I would say maybe are a little bit more liberal than leftist reaching out and saying like, you know, I voted for our rights. You know, I wanted us to be okay. And I think they're being genuine when they say that, of course. But it's also the other side of the coin where, again, even if Kamala won, like maybe, like hard maybe that would have been good for the American middle class. Maybe. We really don't know what she would have done or not have done if she was in office because in some ways her policies were unclear in some ways. But in general, like we said, people think Republicans are the bad guys, liberals are the good guys, at least on the left side of the political spectrum. But the reality is that was not going to be good for Gaza. It wasn't going to be good for Palestine. It wasn't going to be good for Lebanon. It wasn't going to be good for Syria. It wasn't going to be good for Congo. It wasn't going to be good for the global south. It wasn't going to be good for a lot of people. So, which eventually boomerangs and comes back around to us. So I felt conflicted about that, but there was also just like now that some time has passed and people are still messaging me and saying like, you know, like, are you okay? Do you have a plan? What are you going to do? And my, you know, even my mom was asking me like, you know, how do you feel about this for like your rights? What are you going to do moving forward? And I'm just like grateful that people are thinking about me and considering me as a trans person, black trans person in Texas, but I'm also frustrated because I've been suffering in a very specific way since 2020 because of COVID specifically, but also because of the fact that like I can't even like a lot of people just basically abandoned me and everybody, you know, and a lot of other people who are still, you know, a lot of you guys who are still masking, who are still trying to spread the word about COVID. Like a lot of us got abandoned a long time ago by people who claim to be on the left with us, you know? Um, it's frustrating because I've been isolated. I've been struggling financially, emotionally. I've been struggling with mental health. I've been struggling for the last 4 years very consistently. And talking about it to some extent, whether online or directly with people, and just kind of having them dismiss or not fully understand at the very least, or just kind of go on with their lives regardless of anything that I've said. So it's kind of like, yeah, this particular election outcome sucks because who knows what the fuck happens next and for how long we're going to be stuck with these people because if they want to dismantle democracy in the way, our fake democracy in the way that Democrats have been threatening, then like, yeah, it's not looking good. But at the same time, like Texas has been terrible since I've been born, you know? And for me, like a lot of my current suffering under Democrats was still like struggling to make ends meet, struggling to pay rent, struggling to put food on the table, and doing a lot of this stuff alone, which, I don't technically have to do it alone, but I made a lot of choices to do things alone because nobody would listen to me about COVID. So it's just kind of like, thanks, but also this has been building up and I've been trying to talk about it for 4 years. Yeah, rent increases as well. Rent rent has increased so much. My first apartment still overpriced, but it was like 810 square feet was $845 a month. If I was paying that right now, I would be living my best life. Maybe not my best life, but I would be living a considerably better life right now. But I was paying at first in my last apartment 780 square feet, I think. Um it was 1068, I think, or that might be what I'm that's no, that's not what I'm paying now. It was 1068 when I first moved in, and that was with uh what do they call it? Low income housing. So I had to qualify for that, and it took months, by the way. But 1068 when I first moved in. The next year, my lease renewed while I was injured after I just had surgery and was staying at my parents' house. Went up $200, so 1268. And then the final year, as my lease, I didn't renew my lease, but they moved it up another $100, so 1368 for rent in a one bedroom apartment in income restricted housing. So that was like the low end and pretty decent for the amount of space. Trying to pay for that after having a surgery that basically drained my bank account. Not being able to work because I couldn't walk, not being able to do side jobs, not being able to focus on creative work because I had just had surgery and needed to rehabilitate my leg so I could walk again. Stuff like that. Like, getting into the weeds here, but all of this to say, like, I've been suffering. Economically, specifically, been suffering and having to suffer alone because everybody else had already decided that it was acceptable to let the vulnerable fall by the wayside. And even though I technically wasn't and still am not considered the vulnerable by the state's perspective of immune compromised and disabled people and so on and so forth, it's like that shouldn't have to motivate me to want to protect people who are. That shouldn't have to motivate me to want to protect my own health. Or that shouldn't have to motivate me to not want to protect my own health. I don't, and I know a lot of you feel the same way. I know a lot of you are doing the best that you can with what you've had as well. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to me. But just something about that. And then having people, now that Trump has been elected again, our perfect villain, our perfect scapegoat, is back into office with some of the worst people you can imagine, RFK Jr. included. And I haven't talked about him yet. Maybe we'll talk about him too. That's another person you need to look into. Also, need to look into Make America Healthy Again. And I would also look into, is there anything else? Um, well, I would look into those things right now. That's all I can think of. If you haven't looked into Project 2025, look into that as well. But all of these things are basically like spin-offs of spin-offs of the consequences of the Great Barrington Declaration. And so basically, like, yeah, my rights, whatever that means, are threatened, but everybody's rights are threatened. regardless of who you voted for. Everybody's rights are threatened and have been threatened this entire time, like they started Project 2025 who knows how long ago, in baby steps, probably with all of these other things that we've been talking about, just trying it to see if it would pass. How much can they really get away with over Americans before we actually have another George Floyd rebellion, at the very least, because that's like the bare minimum of what we could do. They want to just see how much they can get away with, basically, and we've let them get away with a lot. So to me, it's like the election, however it was going to turn out, they're going to keep doing shit that we don't like, and we're going to keep letting them, because the way capitalism is set up, like I said in those tweets earlier, is that as long as there's capitalism, we're going to prioritize profits and capital and the economy over human lives and over humanity, because you have to do that in order for capitalism to thrive. And the other side of this too is that, like, regardless of who's in power, the empire is collapsing. The empire is collapsing, and the climate is, you know, I think climate change, the reality of climate change is a little more complicated than just the basic, like, we're all going to die and burn up in about 20 years. We also might not, but the way that we live currently, we cannot sustain the way that climate is going right now. Like, we can't. We're not going to be able to. The ice storms that we've been having in Texas, the heat waves that we've been having, the hurricanes, the tornadoes, whatever it is, like, our way of life is, we literally just can't sustain it regardless of if we all burn up or not. We're fucked either way. So to me, it's just kind of like, yeah, the election maybe like accelerates a lot of massive um inconveniences at best, and like catastrophic uh consequences at worst, but the writing is on the wall. And so I feel like, you know, they've been using trans people as scapegoats for so long now that, like, American people, for the most part, there are definitely people who are weird and mean and evil about trans people, for sure. The violence is happening. I am definitely anxious at a baseline all the time, doing basic shit like going to the bathroom now in Texas. Especially like if I were to go on a road trip and have to drive through a lot of these small towns, like, God forbid I get pulled over and a cop sees my driver's license that says female because I can't legally get it changed, and they look at me and they say, "What are you doing in these parts, queer?" Make me get out of the car, and then who fucking knows what happens after that. Like, basic everyday life is already traumatizing enough that this is just more of that. And so in some ways it just kind of feels like this is par for the course. Like, not surprised but not pleased. It sucks. Yes, I'm scared, but also I've been scared. This is not new, and worse things have happened. Not worse things have happened, but like a lot of terrible shit has already happened that I've already had to cope with, and I'm tired. I'm fucking tired. Like, I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted. When I was talking to my mom, I was telling her, like, this sucks, but also I can't even like plot an escape or an exit plan, because my day-to-day life is already so taxing and exhausting that, like, I can't even come up with a plan if I wanted to. One, because I don't have the money. Like, one, I don't have the money. Two, I don't have the wherewithal. So it's just kind of like, my main concerns every day are getting through the day and eating, and maybe going to bed on time. That's like all I care about right now. That's all I have the capacity to care about right now. And adding anything else to my plate is just too much. Like, I short out and then I just kind of get suicidal, to be honest. I'm not actually going to do anything, but the ideation is constantly present, because just the heaviness and the dread and the exhaustion constantly, and people just kind of being like, what are we going to do? Like, fumbling around is a lot. And then on top of that, you have people being like, well, we need to get organized. And like, yes, we do need to get organized, but also many of us are exhausted and don't have time. Like, the people who need to get organized are the people who have the fucking luxury of not worrying about where their next meal is coming from. They need to fucking sacrifice some shit for the rest of us because it sucks that the most marginalized people who already have enough to worry about are now also the people who have to tell everybody else how to get fucking organized. No. No. If the majority of people who voted for that man are the majority of white people who inhabit the freaking US, y'all need to go deal with y'all family members. Y'all need to go deal with all of y'all's people who y'all have cut off and cut yourself off from and don't want to talk. Y'all need to go deal with them. Y'all need to go get organized. Y'all need to go get some skin in the game because we're tired. I'm tired. It sucks that I have strong survival instincts in the first place. Otherwise, I would have stopped masking a long time ago. But here we are. I have to be queer. I have to be somewhat passing at the very least so that I can get away with being queer on a daily basis. So I can get away with being a trans man on a daily basis. I have to tape my freaking chest every single week to make sure that I pass. I have to go through all of these extra things all the time to make sure that I pass, talk to people in a lower tone, all of this shit just to make sure that somebody doesn't clock me in a bathroom in Odessa, Texas, and then I have to pay them $10,000 that I don't have. That's a real ordinance that just passed. So it's just like, I don't have time for this shit. I don't have time to worry about any of this shit. I have to worry about getting through the day. But the rest of you people who have time and who have energy and who have resources need to step up. You need to step up. So the people who are going to defeat Trump are not Democrats. Sorry. They are using that man to their advantage so that in the next 4 years, if he dies or can't run again or whatever happens, they can run another trash Democrat who's going to run fascist policies, and the rest of us be like, well, at least he's blue. And the rest of us are going to be like, at least it's not JD Vance. At least it's not Vivek Ramaswamy. At least it's not Nikki Haley. At least it's not whoever. No, Democrats do not care. They don't care. They might delay our suffering, but them niggas are coworkers. They work in that White House together on purpose. So we got to do something. Anyway, this was not meant to be like a call to action, but if you feel called to action, then great. But this is mainly meant to be a reflection, a reflection of the last 4 years, because I don't want us to forget how we got here. And a lot of how we got here was because of the pandemic, because of manufactured consent over the last 4 years of more and more bullshit that we should not put up with and that we should not tolerate. But because we are conditioned to be individualistic and to prioritize our personal interests over that of our neighbor, um, we'll keep putting our heads down and just trying to get through the day, like I was just talking about, like how I do. So I think it'll be important to remember and to document as much as we can moving forward, because the gaslighting, I'm telling y'all, with Saturn and Pisces, based on how major Pisces transits have gone in the last 4 years, like Jupiter in Pisces 2022, I think it was May 2022 to May 2024, like, or 2023. Baby, the Mars retrograde in Pisces in 2020. We didn't even talk about that. Like, that was really the one. That was really the one where they started changing the numbers. They started changing testing. They started changing testing data, all that stuff. And that was summer 2020 to spring 2021, I think. Mars retrograde between Aries and Pisces, but mostly through Pisces. That was the beginning. So yeah, then we had Jupiter and Pisces where they just straight up stopped. Well, they didn't straight up stop keeping up with data, but they definitely changed the data to a way that a lot of people tuned out. And then we're getting to Saturn in Pisces next year. We're not going to know which way is up. I just feel like, and so it's going to be very important to have receipts. It's going to be very important to document things, to remember things, to journal, to talk to people, to record, to archive. Like, we need as much evidence as possible because they're going to try to rewrite history, recent history, and we need to be ahead of it. We need to be vigilant, especially with, the brain fog and everything else that comes with multiple COVID infections. Like, a lot of people's memories have gone to shit for real. Like, a lot of people, even if you haven't had COVID multiple times, like, I haven't had COVID to my knowledge, knock on wood, and my memory used to be fantastic. Well, no, I won't say fantastic, but my memory used to be at least a little bit better than this, but trauma is bad for memory as well. So we really need to be vigilant in that way. Man, this would be a great way to plug my astrotherapy journal, but I'm not going to do that because I don't believe in I don't believe in scaremongering in that way to promote a product that's against my values. But that is part of the reason why we created that journal, was so that we could document transits and document just life as it goes on and make connections later. But that also takes a lot of effort. I'm not going to lie. Like, I've struggled to use my own journal. But I do still have some left. If you didn't get one and you want one, we might make more sticker sheets next year. We haven't talked about it recently, but I'm probably going to put it on sale once the sun enters. I'm going to increase the sale once the sun enters Scorpio. It'll probably be 50% off because we'll be halfway through the transit list. So I have like maybe 5 left or 4 or something like that. But yeah, anyway, all of that to say, was there anything else? I don't think there was anything else other than stop the infighting. I know many of you who are in the chat right now aren't really doing it, but if anybody watches this back later, stop the infighting. We don't need to fight each other. We don't need to blame each other for who somebody voted for. We really don't. Like, what we need to be doing, I think I already said this, but what we need to be doing is learning how to deal with conflict. I've considered shifting a lot of my work towards dealing with conflict resolution, because that's a skill that I learned in my course. We need to learn how to deal with conflict, and hey Jada, we need to learn how to deal with conflict, and we need to learn how to deal with people who don't think like us and people who disagree with us. And we need to learn how to see humanity in each other, because we are not the ruling class. Even people who are in higher tax brackets than us, they are not the ruling class. Like, I'm not saying you need to go be friends with racists and bigots. No, obviously not. And that wouldn't happen in the first place. But people who, like people who are like coworkers who, voted for Trump, but they're not like being assholes directly to your face. People like that. We have to learn how to somehow be less polarized, purely because there's no other way all of us are going to come together in the same version of reality by calling each other stupid and being condescending and shitting on people for who they vote for out of desperation of just trying to better their material circumstances. It sucks. I don't want to do it. But listen, this was the other thing I was going to do, actually. I was gonna talk about briefly because I've been on here too long and I feel my energy draining, but I was gonna talk about how I grew up in Amarillo, Texas. If you've seen where that is on a map in Texas and you've seen it in the context of like how places vote in elections, born in the middle of a sea of red. Okay. And I made it out without adopting any of their beliefs. But I had to be around people day in and day out who think like MAGA Republicans do, to my face, in my ear, telling me. My dad was just telling me about how he worked at his job. And if I told y'all where he worked, and he was just there. I'm not even going to get into that. Maybe another day. But he had people talking to him about, yeah, interracial marriage is a sin because my dad's biracial. Interracial marriage is a sin, and it's not. I'm not saying it's your fault, but your parents, there was a sin. They shouldn't have done that. They shouldn't have done that. They're holding guns, talking to him, telling him this to his face. I grew up around kids who very much wanted to remind me every single day that I was black. And I was like, really? Amazing. I had no idea. Reminded me every day, making jokes, using the N word, all kinds of stuff. And I'm like one of 5 black people in school. So I just have to sit there and take it on the nose because what am I supposed to do? As a girl at that, what am I supposed to do? Boys are fucking in my ear calling me names and talking about black people. And then, getting older, being a teenager, being in college, and people are like, well, you're not like those black people though. I'm like, okay, that's shit again too. Like, here, I've heard all of it. The worst things you could possibly hear. I grew up hearing that shit. And somehow still made friends with people, somehow still made it through the day, got along with people, and somehow still managed to see the humanity. And I didn't have a choice, is what I'm saying. But it's possible. And like, I got the fuck out of there for a reason and moved to where some of the most liberal people at least were in Texas, but still, like, it doesn't change the fact that even being here, still hearing some of the same shit, people putting their foot in their mouth. They just say it maybe less with their chest, but if I can make it from that terrible of an environment and still manage to see some level of humanity in those people, we can all do it. Maybe we can't all do it. I don't think we all should do it. I take that back. But I was talking to Nadine about this, and I wanted her to come on here and talk about it with me because she made a really good point. I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, but she made a really good point that one thing the Democrats in general have failed to do over the last few years is appeal to white people, like appeal to white men specifically and white women, but especially white men in a way that makes them feel like being liberal is not them totally giving up their humanity and their power, Like, it's not to say that we need to be like the Republicans and, you know, spit white supremacist talking points, white supremacist patriarchal talking points at them all the time, but we need white people to see the benefit of having this more socialist mindset, really not even leftist, but more socialist mindset. We need white people to see that you don't have to be a fascist to have power. You don't have to be a fascist. You don't have to be uh um you don't have to hold on to this colonial mindset to have power, to be strong, to be relevant, to be accepted, whatever it is. Like, we haven't done anything to appeal to white men for real in a way that would make them want to abandon the power that they get from those systems, even though it's harming them in the process, too. We could teach them about the harms all day long, but they're not really experiencing it. We're experiencing it. We have to teach them the benefits. So we have to be able to speak to what are the benefits of actually being socialist. We have to preach the values that we say we have as people who are on the left or people who are more community minded. We have to embody and kind of demonstrate the benefits of being in community and being in relationship, because the reality is whiteness is a cult. Whiteness is a cult that white people are indoctrinated into with each other. And to them, belonging is more important than, you know, caring about what's happening in other countries. Belonging is more important than caring about black people. Belonging is more important than caring about a lot of things. And sometimes belonging ironically looks like upholding individualism and hyper independence, you know? So, yeah, absolutely. This is what I was saying earlier. White leftists need to take up this mantle instead of looking down on and othering white people who aren't there yet. Absolutely. And I was like, "You know what? That's a really good point." And she was also saying, Nadine was also saying something along the lines of like, people who end up going to the far right, and this, I know this is a tricky talking point, so I say this with a grain of salt, but feeling dehumanized by people on the left. And a lot of that is because I don't think they recognize their own humanity. And a lot of times, what comes with whiteness and white supremacy is this like kind of godlike mentality, that you're invincible and that you are high and mighty and all of this other stuff, powerful and invincible and all the other ableist tropes that come with it. But uh my dryer buzzing made me lose my train of thought. Oh, but they don't see their own humanity in a way that's like actually human, and therefore they're still going to believe that they're better than us and therefore deserve certain things and all this other stuff. And so we have to find a way to appeal to their humanity in a way that's like, look, if you put all that other shit down, look at all of the things that we stand to gain through coming together. You don't have to sacrifice yourself to the economy. You don't have to sacrifice your kids to the economy. You don't have to sacrifice your life and body and well-being to the economy in order to survive. Because that was the whole reason a lot of people got mad during COVID, was that they felt like they didn't have a choice. They felt like they had to, uphold all of those white supremacist ideals in order to can be considered valid people. Ugh, hold on one second. Ugh, hold on. Ugh. Um, like the education, the education of anti-racism is important and necessary, and the education of like history and colonialism is important. And it's kind of also that thing where, speaking of conflict resolution, right? Like it's not enough in conflict resolution to just tell the other person what they did to hurt you, you know? That's part of it. Learning how to speak and articulate the ways that you've been impacted by another person is again a big part of conflict resolution. And there also has to be some level of like, this would be better. This would be a better way. This would be the solution. Like there's kind of this like, you can't just criticize and leave it at that. This is what you're doing wrong and leave it at that. Or this is what you did wrong and leave it like that. That's not conflict resolution. The conflict resolution comes from all parties basically acknowledging what they've contributed to the conflict and coming up with a solution that is equitable, I guess, or something to that extent, that leads all of us to a place where everyone feels heard, everyone feels understood, and there is a um, cohesive solution or resolution. Yes, have to leave room for an actual resolution that says, this is what we don't want to do. This is what we do want to do. This is how we can be. This is what would be beneficial to all of us who are involved, not just me. Because there's also a way that you can take victimization to a point where now you are just doing the full circle thing of using your victimhood to have power over other people, which unfortunately I'm going to say it is what I think a lot of us end up doing. And that's why a lot of people don't take us seriously after a certain point, because they're like, you're just doing this to make me feel bad about who I am. When isn't that the whole thing that we're trying to get them to stop doing with us? You know? Um, yes, exactly. This being a great form. You didn't do X or you did X. It made me feel Y. Perhaps you can do Z next time. whatever. Like there has to be something on the other end, or especially like with drawing boundaries. Drawing boundaries is another one. I'm not willing to do this. I'm not comfortable with this, but I am willing to do this. Meeting somewhere in the middle in that sense. That's not to say again that we need to concede to people who are actually like bigoted and have no interest in changing. But I actually think a lot more people are probably more open and receptive than we like to think, but have already like kind of taken on a lot of shame, probably, and a lot of guilt and whatever else. And also who maybe adopt some ideas that we're opposed to, but that aren't necessarily like, you know, racism on its face. There are a lot of like, because that's another thing. Like when I was growing up around Republicans, a lot of them really only cared about like the economy because they were business owners, their parents were business owners, and they wanted tax breaks. Like sometimes it was that simple. And that's why they usually say some shit like, why do y'all cut each other off over politics? It's just a business deal to them. It's not personal. So there are a lot of Republicans who actually just feel like it's just business. And even though we know, because we're, decolonial mindset, that it's not just business, actually, like it is there's a lot more to it than just that. To them it is just business, and so it's like the education has to be there in a way that's not scolding them, or that's not like shitting on them for what they believe and how they think and all that other kind of stuff, especially since they technically do have more power in the system. It wouldn't benefit them to abandon that from the place that they sit. So it's like, yeah, there's a lot of work that has to be done in that sense. But the point of me saying all of this is that we have to learn how to fucking talk to each other again, because right now we don't know how to do that. People who are willing and open, um, to the right of us, who are willing to learn from us, will then be able to talk to people who are to the right of them and to the right of them, and so on and so forth. At least that's what I would think, what I would like to believe. Maybe that's not true. Maybe some niggas got to die. I don't know, but um, joking, allegedly, just being funny, YouTube. But um, people want to listen to people that they think already agree with them and only differ slightly. So the more that we can spread like conversation in that way, the more people I think we could get through to. Jada says, one of the ways that I teach it to clients is when having these conversations, what do we make what someone did or didn't do mean? When you did X, I made it mean Y. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we had something like that too, where it was like sometimes whenever you're expressing how you feel to somebody, you can lead with saying something like, I have a story in my head, or I could be projecting, but this is the experience that I'm having, or like Jada said, this is what it means to me whenever you did this thing. And adding in like, this is the reference point or the context that I'm coming from when I say this. Maybe you didn't intend to do that. I don't think you intended to do that, but this is what I believed from this incident, and I'm sharing it with you because I want us to somehow work this out. Can you tell me what it meant for you? Can we talk about what happened here while we're on different pages? I want to understand where you're coming from, and I also would love to be understood about where I'm coming from. But of course, that's hard to do again whenever you're dealing with people in really triggering situations like family members, or, people who you're not that close with and you don't know how they're going to react and stuff like that. But that's where then all the self-regulation stuff comes in, and where all of the um, coping strategy skills come in while you're in those highly tense conflict situations, because it's scary, especially if you're coming from a background where you were told to keep that shit to yourself, or I'll give you something to cry about, or whatever, from your childhood. You like literally think you're going to get your ass beat for trying to speak up and say how you feel about something. And so um yes, got to take accountability. It's empowering because it's a point of connection, and it also doesn't put everything on the other person. Yeah. And that's exactly the whole reason why I wanted to bring this up, was because of all the blame and all the finger pointing that we're experiencing as part of the infighting right now. Everyone wants to find somebody to blame. And it's like, um blame is only ever going to put people on the defensive. blame and accusations and suspicions and assumptions and all of those things are only ever going to put somebody on the defensive because you're now challenging the perception that they have of themselves with the perception that you have of them. And the ego does not like that. The whole reason the ego exists is because the ego wants to control how basically we feel about ourselves. And therefore, we have to control how you feel about us. And if you tell me that I've done something that's upset you, my ego doesn't like that. That's a threat to me. So you can disarm the ego by saying, look, this is the way I'm understanding and seeing things right now. I'm not saying it's the truth, but it is the truth for me. I want to share it with you so that you can understand where I'm coming from. Can you also um, share with me your experience and where you're coming from? Because I don't want to assume the worst of you. But right now it feels really bad to me. Stuff like that. It's hard to think of, but it's a practice, which is why you have coaches who can help you practice if you want. That's what this election was intended to do, in my opinion, to further divide those of us who needed to unite. Yeah, absolutely. That's what we were talking about earlier. This whole chat was basically like me talking about the conditions that have led to manufactured consent around basically more individualism and to manufacture more consent that we don't have to care about each other. And so getting to this point now is like, well, look, it fucking worked. Because now you got people who don't understand how people voted for Trump acting just like people who voted for Trump. Embarrassing. Your slip is showing, babes. So yeah, being less condescending in the coming years, extremely important because people will absolutely be living in a different truth and different reality than us. And yes, about to get into conflict resolution. Yeah. Um, and that's the thing too with this. Like, what's so funny? Have y'all seen the show Couples Therapy? I love that show because oh, my mom is trying to call me. Um, hold on one second. Okay, sorry. She already called me once. She said you wasn't gonna call me back. I was like, I'm doing a live. um, yeah, the show Couples Therapy. So it's weird. I don't like conflict for myself, but I also kind of do. A little bit masochistic in that way. I've always enjoyed conflict in a toxic way, I'll just admit, because I like extremes. I like emotional roller coasters. I don't like, but they feel familiar, they feel exciting, they feel exhilarating. They're also incredibly emotionally taxing. And the few times where previously I would get to experience anger, because I don't usually experience anger very often. So, conflict, especially relational conflict, when I didn't know how to do conflict was just like, me carrying something till I reach my tipping point, and then I reach my tipping point and I wait for a moment that I can just let it all spill out and dump all of my shit on this other person. And now we're just like, now it's just like shots fired in all directions and everybody's just lost their cool. And it's like one of the few moments that I would get to be unhinged and not be calm, cool, collected Capricorn, especially if the other person initiated it. It's like, okay, I'm gonna let them throw the first punch, whatever it is emotionally, and then we just fucking go. And eventually we would make up, get off the roller coaster, and then get back on it, on and off, on and off. And it was an exhausting way to live, but that was the only thing that I understood. So, but there was something about just like getting some shit off of your chest and the other person getting some shit off of your chest and everybody's raw emotion just being out and then fixing it. Like, oh my God, we just said all of this crazy shit. Don't be like me, by the way, but we just said all of this shit to each other and somehow we managed to come back from it. And then you get like the high of like, oh my God, and we love each other, and then the makeup sex and everything else. And it's like, that's bad. That's not good. If you're in a relationship like that, come see me or somebody. Seek help. It should not be that way for a long time. But conflict in a relationship in general, like conflict over low stakes things, like I don't know, doing the dishes or finances, and one partner spends too much money, and whatever. There's like ways and things to have conflict about that are normal. And conflict itself is healthy because at the end of the day, you are two different people. You're not going to agree on everything. And it's important to make your voice and your version of reality heard by the other person so that, they know who you are and where you're coming from. And same for them to do it for you. It's important to differentiate yourself in that way. And in order to do that, you have to have conflict. We all have a Mars, as I like to say. We all have a Jupiter. We all have a sun. And so, but I say that to say relational conflict is like a kink of mine. I just think it's so incredible that you can be in such different places, such opposing places from each other, and somehow find a way back to each other in a way that then makes you feel stronger, that strengthens your connection after the point. I think somebody said that earlier. Addressing the issue to understand is a point of strengthening relationship. Absolutely. Because you know what? People think that secure relationships and that like security or secure attachment style means that you never fight. Absolutely not. Secure attachment style is the same thing as learning how to ride a bike. And sometimes when you're learning how to ride a bike, you fall off. And then you fall off, you didn't die, you didn't break a bone, you maybe scraped your knee a little bit, put some uh put some hydrogen peroxide on that bitch, put a band-aid on, and then you get back on. And then guess what? You're still learning how to ride a bike. And then you get better at riding a bike, but you also get more confident at falling. You learn how to fall. This is a weird analogy, but the whole point is like, people who are, I'm talking about biking, so I'll stick with this analogy. People who are like professional Red Bull riders in the mountain bike world, they have this event called lovingly fighting. They have this event called Red Bull Rampage, and they do it in Virgin, Utah. Virgin, Utah? Yeah. I think that's what it's called. And it's like the side of a cliff, mountain biking, these lines that they carve out themselves, and it's like the most extreme mountain biking event that exists, basically. And the thing about professional mountain bikers is that they know how to fall. And because they know how to fall in a way that, for the most part, they sustain the least amount of injuries, they're able to do the wildest shit on a bike. If they never learned how to fall like me, I'm not very good at falling. Y'all heard my story about hurdling and how I fell over that last hurdle and just laid there and wallowed in self-pity. It's the same with mountain biking. I've only had a handful of falls on a mountain bike, and so I'm terrified of falling all the time because I don't know how to catch myself. And so it keeps me from taking reasonable, exciting risks, or at the very least, it keeps me from increasing my skills in a way that I probably really need to do in order to be a better rider because I don't know how to fall. Conflict is the same way. If you don't know how to fight in your relationship, you're going to be afraid to fight, and then you're never going to be fully heard, seen, and understood in your relationship because you're not going to trust that you and your partner can resolve, or you and your friend, you and your family member, whoever it is, can actually resolve the issue that you're having. You're going to feel like any issue that you have is a sign that your relationship is either doomed or not meant to be. When that's not reality. The reality is you're going to disagree sometimes. And the bigger reality, in fact, is that you're going to be attracted to people who are different than you so that you can actually develop those parts of yourself that didn't get developed, in your family of origin. We can't help ourselves. We love it. It's sexy. That friend you have that is nothing like you, but they bring out the best in you. Your extroverted friend who you probably wouldn't go out to the bar by yourself, but when you go with that friend, you find yourself talking to all these other people and doing all of this stuff. But then sometimes you're like, damn, bitch, you talk so much. Like, shut up sometimes, like we're attracted to people who are different than us. And therefore, we're going to have conflict with people that we care about at some point, whether that's frequently because you live together and there's a lot of hours in a day, or because, shit happens at some point. And if you're not allowed, this is the thing that gets me about people on the left sometimes, sorry to say, that we can be so rigid and so self-righteous sometimes and so narrow-minded and so convicted that like nuance is not allowed to exist. Everything can be so black and white sometimes. And so then whenever we go out in the real world and people are just like being people and having human moments, we burn them at the stake. Immediately cut them off. No room for grace, no room for mistakes, no room for errors, no room for saying the wrong thing, no room for just ignorance in general of just not knowing something because you haven't read every single book out there on, decolonization or whatever it is. It's like there's very little room, very little room for error sometimes. And I know that's probably not the reality with like actual organizing outside. I know for some people that unfortunately is the case, but I know specifically online, we have a very low tolerance for difference. We have a very low tolerance for people getting it wrong. We have a very low tolerance for um, an openness to ideas that aren't our own sometimes or something that we've already agreed with. We can just be very rigid. And so that stuff like that can make being in these spaces very intimidating, you know, or to just feel like you're constantly being corrected, that you're not allowed to have a voice and make you then afraid to just like even introduce ideas or try to speak up or try to do something because someone's going to be waiting to kick you out, cut you off, to shame you, to judge you, to blame you, to do all of this stuff. Is just like, that was the whole reason that we ended Diff for Lib. Well, we didn't end Diff for Lib, but that was the reason I left. That was the reason Madison and Elias left. I know y'all probably didn't know if I was ever going to talk about that out loud. I didn't know I was going to talk about it right now, but I'm going to talk about it right now. That was part of the reason me and Dana stopped being friends. And she knows this. I told her, but it was just like, or did I tell her? Maybe I didn't tell her. Well, maybe she'll hear it now. But it was because it just felt like constantly walking on, constantly being on, what is the phrase? Constantly kind of tiptoeing around each other or around other people in the group, or in our not me getting tea about what happened. There's way more to say about that. That was Mars retrograde in Taurus for us. I will never forget that for the rest of my life. But basically, the large overarching theme, that's yes, eggshells. Thank you. Walking on eggshells. That was a big reason why I'll speak for myself because I don't want to speak for other people, but that was a big reason why I kind of like needed to just distance myself from that community in general, because it felt like there was no room. Well, not even that. It felt like I was constantly on eggshells with anything that I said, and I still feel this way. This is still something that I deal with, and why doing daily lives was actually such a big deal for me, because I struggled to just speak my mind and say what I think, because I'm worried I'm going to say the wrong thing and then nobody's going to have any grace for me, because who knows, like with the fucking ultra conservative background that I come from, even though I didn't adopt those beliefs, I still was swimming in the indoctrination of it, resisting it. And who knows, what may or may not have slipped in that I don't even agree with, but maybe I don't realize why, all of the multi-layered complex reasons why, certain things are wrong, basically. So it just got to be too much pressure. It got to feeling like, there was a certain attitude or certain way with, the condescension and just like dunking on tropicals and all this other stuff, that was just like, I don't want to be like this anymore. Like I just reached a point of being like, I don't want to be like this anymore. I don't want to, like, I still have my moments, but I don't want to exist in a way that everybody else is always beneath me, you know? And I didn't want to exist in a way that felt like I always had to be right and that I was never allowed to be wrong, or that I was up on this pedestal with people worshiping me and, whatever. I didn't want to be a cult leader, basically. And I'm not saying that anybody else was explicitly, but that was kind of the vibe that it was starting to feel like. Uh, and it felt like if we had to go, yes, exactly. At the end of the day, the message is the message, no matter the source or the modality. Um, if there are 7 different ways that you can land on the same truth, then who cares how you got there? And if the truth is the truth, then you should be able to stand on that without having to make everybody else wrong. That's how I feel. And there were just a lot of ways that I caught myself behaving by the end of, that friendship, by the end of that kind of community and whatever else. There were just a bunch of ways that I saw myself behaving that I didn't like. I think it was necessary for my personal growth in the sense that like I was deeply um confronted, or I don't know, I was in relationship with my shadow in a way that I'd never been, in the way of being, self-righteous and judgmental and arrogant and hubristic. I know y'all don't think that way, but those are thoughts that or maybe y'all thought that way, I don't know. I had my moments and I own that. But that was not a way that I wanted to be, and there were times in those moments where on the one hand it was nice to finally feel like I had a voice after a life of not having a voice. It was kind of nice to feel like I had a voice and people wanted to listen to me, and that I was, smart and whatever else, and that people believed me. And so then, you take that too far because it's a pendulum swing. And I was also feeling emboldened by the people I was surrounded by. But that just wasn't me. That's not how I wanted to be. That's not the person I wanted to be. And I didn't want to encourage other people to be that way either, because a lot of people would come to my defense sometimes if I was being loud and wrong. And it's like, I don't really want that either. Maybe we should not be this way. So um but yeah, I do think with Dana in particular, and Dana, if you listen to this, I don't remember if I told you this directly, but if you hear it from here, I'm sorry you're hearing it this way, and I couldn't be more direct with you at the time. But it did feel like I was on eggshells around her, and that I couldn't fully say if I thought that she was wrong, or that I thought she was doing something wrong, or if we were in conflict with each other, or just things that I didn't agree with. It just didn't feel like I didn't feel confident enough a lot of times, or that there was room for my voice in our relationship, kind of like Jada is talking about right now. I told my coach, if I have to walk on eggshells, we've already lost a relationship. I didn't realize that I felt that way most of the time because I was also young. I was only like 23, 24 whenever we met. Um, so a lot of the time I just didn't I didn't know that I felt a lot of times I had her up on a pedestal, right? And so I'm having a proud friend moment right now. A lot of times I admittedly had her up on a pedestal, and she could never be wrong in my eyes. And so even when she was wrong, and even when part of me was like, I don't know about this friend, I think maybe dial it back. Even if she would ask my opinion, it just felt like there was no room for it, or that it didn't matter, or whatever she had to say was smarter or better than anything that I could come up with. And so I just shrank. And I didn't realize until we'd actually gotten into our first real conflict in 2021, 2022, yeah, 2022, end of 2022. I didn't realize until we got into our first conflict that for whatever reason, it just didn't feel like she could really hear me. And I didn't have the skills and the tools at the time to really advocate for myself and to do constructive conflict, basically. So eventually more things happen that I don't need to get into here, but just as far as like me owning my part, at some point I just kind of felt like, I've been in this friendship long enough to feel like this is just not right for me. And it doesn't have to be an indictment against her necessarily, but it's just not working for me. I can't be myself here, basically. And as long as I'm here, I feel like I will continue to shrink or doubt myself because because of reasons. And like I said, I didn't have the tools at the time to do anything differently. And so what made sense to me was to just separate myself. And, there are more details that I don't need to get into, but at the end of the day, I just had to trust myself that this was not somewhere that I wanted to be, or that I felt like I belonged anymore, and that it was time for me to go carve out my own path. which required a lot of me actually trusting that the things that I had to say were relevant and interesting and that people cared what I thought. But I'll be honest, you guys, I was really scared. I won't even say that I was scared, but I really didn't know if people cared what I had to say because I was saying it or if they cared what I had to say because I was connected to her. So, um now we're here. Now we're here and I'm a big boy. But I do feel it's important to say, mostly for myself, that it wasn't all bad. Like, I got a lot out of that relationship, and if it wasn't for that relationship, I wouldn't be here doing this, talking to you right now, you know? Um, that relationship changed the trajectory of my life. So, and there were a lot of times that I did feel like she was a really good friend to me, you know? And I don't regret that relationship, you know? I hate the way that it ended, to be honest. I wish it didn't have to be like that. And it probably didn't have to be like that, but it also probably did. But point being, it was like that. So now we're here. Um, and a lot of weird shit has happened since then. But the moral of the story is we need to learn how to do conflict. We need to learn how to do conflict. We need to learn how to disagree. We need to learn how to have constructive, reparative disagreements and conflicts and whatever in a way that does not lead to us cutting each other off and for that feeling like that's the only solution. It's not the only solution. There's a way to respectfully disagree and to also work some shit out. I didn't know how to do that before I didn't know how to do that before my relationship and coaching course. And since then, I've learned a lot and I've practiced a lot in my personal life. It helps me repair my relationship with my parents, not completely, but in a way that we're getting better. It's helped me repair my romantic relationship issues, even though I'm single now, but in a way that I'm still friends with my ex, as you have all seen. That took a lot of work. Okay. It was certainly not rainbows and butterflies the whole time. And I have had more conflict with close friends, which I used to never have conflict with friends. I've had more conflict with close friends, and all of us have gotten better. And so now it's less scary. It's still scary, but it's less scary. And I think, yeah, I really might, well, not might. I will be somehow incorporating more of that into the work that I do because we're going to need it if we want to survive. We are going to need it if we're going to survive this presidency and whatever else is coming down the pipeline. So, anyway, let me see what y'all are saying. I was not expecting to talk about that today. What the fuck? Let me see here. Yeah, skating, like walking on thin ice, walking on eggshells for sure. Um, at the end of the day, the message is that, yeah, we talked about that. Yeah, I'm just coming back to this as well because I have been an astrologer and a coach for many of you already, like in one-on-one situations, and I still stand by this. If you didn't fully trust this before, because of all the things we just talked about, like, I do want to emphasize today that if we're ever in a session of any kind and I say something that you don't like or that doesn't feel good to you or that you don't agree with or that you have more questions about or that you want to push back on, like, I welcome that. I encourage that. I don't ever want you guys to feel like I am Mr. Authority figure and everything I say is the only truth, because I don't even believe that about everything that I say, okay? I am more than open to pushback, mostly because a lot of time when people push back, it just makes you have to um stand on business in a way that's not doubling down and digging your heels in, but that is like crafting a better argument or crafting a better not crafting a better argument, but like it makes you have to be more intentional with the messages that you're sharing or that you're saying or makes you have to be intentional with how you're showing up or whatever it is. I just think there's a lot of um having to kind of own your reflection, I guess, whenever people push back that you wouldn't have to do if people just never questioned you. So always feel free to question me, please, and to advocate for yourself because I also can't read minds. So I can read charts, but I cannot read minds. I thank you because you owned that. It didn't feel that way to me. I'm glad. Uh, I'm glad that that came across because if I could catch myself, I really did try and tried to apologize. Intergenerational dynamics are tough too in general. Yeah, yeah, that was another thing about that for sure. Having a proud friend moment. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just a boy. I'm so glad you stepped out. If it helps at all, I found you and Dana back in 2020. I appreciated your points then and even more so now with how you've grown. I appreciate that. Yeah. We started being friends, I think I found her end of 2016 and we started being friends in 2018. So we were friends for a while, like genuinely friends for a while. And she literally taught me everything that I know. So I could never truly speak ill of her in a way that's like, I can speak to my experience, but I don't really feel like there's a need to trash her as a person. I know when I first left, I was angry and, you know, being kind of snotty, probably. Um, but I don't even feel that way anymore, to be honest. Water under the bridge. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, thank you for listening. Your perspectives are your own, and that's enough. Thank you. I feel the love. I feel the love. Conflict can definitely be like iron sharpening iron, for sure. How can we disagree and keep each other? Yes, preach. Thank God for coaching. Amen. Hello. Patience with each other is so important, so incredibly important. Underrated skill. And I also empathize with the fact that a lot of people don't have patience for very good reason. And that's why I say, sometimes everybody doesn't need to be, or I'll say it like this, everybody's not always in the space to do this work, and that's okay. Because trauma is real and PTSD and CPTSD is real and disability is real and everything else that can sometimes make this work feel more challenging than your nervous system can handle. And I have a lot of grace for that as well. So I usually feel like, if you usually the more regulated slash more patient person in the room kind of has to hold the space, and it's shitty sometimes and uncomfortable and unfair, but it's also really powerful, you know, or empowering to be that person, to be that container for other people. Sometimes you have to like lead by example, basically. Um, but you also don't always have to do that, you know? Can't wait to see what you do with it. Thanks. Yeah, I'm really just trying to figure out what I am doing. I have so many things that I could do, and it's, like, hard to really streamline, and sometimes I wonder if that's even what I'm supposed to do or if I'm just supposed to go where the wind takes me. So, because 'cause I'm big on doing whatever I wanna do. But as far as, like, how to materially do this work in a sustainable way and still be supported/support myself is where the conundrum often happens. When I'm challenged, I have to make sure I believe what I'm saying. It's interesting how we throw our words around. Yes. Yeah, that's exactly it. When I'm challenged, I have to make sure I believe what I'm saying. That's how I feel too, which I know me and you are kind of the same in that way, Jada, but yeah. Uh 'Cause sometimes, yeah, sometimes one thing about me, one area of growth that I have that I've learned from um being in partnerships and relationships with people who really do take me at face value is that sometimes I just be saying shit. And like I shouldn't I shouldn't do that. You know, like and sometimes people also don't get my sarcasm because I think they think I'm being serious too. But yeah, I'm often caught up in the way that's like, oh, I need to be more mindful with my words because people are listening now. It's not like when I was a child and people weren't listening. I'm an adult and people hear me as you should. Period. Whew. All right. Any final words, besties? I've been on here for 2 hours and that's an hour longer than I planned on being here. We did a lot in this live today. Um, I love you guys and I love this little community. I do consider it a community personally. Um, because I care about y'all in real life, not just on the internet, even if you're far away. But it means a lot to me. It means a lot to me to have this space and to talk to y'all and that y'all actually like, you know, um make an effort to see me, for who I am, just as a person and not as some social media influencer god or whatever. Because I don't have any interest in that at all. I just want to be a person with other people. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Thank you for holding my humanity, and thank you for the times you've let me hold yours. If you haven't already liked the video, like the video. Winter the dude, not just Winter the capital A astrologer. Exactly. I am just some guy. I have a lot to offer, but I am just some guy. Like, please. Please. I'm just some guy. I'm also that nigga for real. um, Grateful for the community space and appreciate you being willing to create the space. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess in the vein of conflict resolution, something that I want to do when I can get my head screwed on straight enough, something that I want to do is more group stuff over Zoom because I know people like that, but I actually want it to be, I do want it to be productive and of value. So, um, I miss like those types of spaces versus just me coming on here and talking. This is more, my therapist and I decided this is more of kind of like a vlogging virtual diary situation because it's important to document things as they're happening. But as far as like real dynamic spaces, yeah, I think it'd be cool to actually engage with you guys in small groups and stuff again. So when I figure out what that is, be on the lookout and sign up for that bitch. Okay. I'm gonna go stare at the wall. I hope you all have a wonderful night. I hope you drink water and hydrate and take your magnesium glycinate for your nervous system or an Epsom salt bath or something. And I will talk to you all very, very soon. Have a good weekend. Cue outro music. That's the best part.